right, welcome back. This is a true podcast, blah, 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 for Fargo Season 4, Episode 8, The Nadir. Dan, what are you thinking here?
I'm thinking so much. So much happened this week. Kinky sex with the devil. Then we got a man throwing another man through a table and then pledging his allegiance to the man he just threw into a table. And that's just where this episode starts. We got character deaths. We got character coming back from the dead.
It's fucking Dr. Harvard.
That's right, baby. We got Dr. Harvard back. This is by far the best episode of this season. And I felt that really early on. Early on, I was thinking to myself, who directed this episode? Because it was so remarkably well shot and well choreographed and just well organized in terms of the way that the scenes played out. So real quick, I mean, my thoughts on the episode are that it was an amazing episode, but I want to surprise you. I want to talk about who directed this episode. Do you know who directed this episode, Tyler?
I do not. I saw the name real fast and it looked somewhat familiar, but I did not look into it.
Okay, so this episode was directed by Sylvain White. Not a name that I knew, but I took note of it just because I thought this was such a remarkable episode of television. I thought this guy directed this episode so well. So I made a note of it, and then I did a very quick Google search because I didn't know who this individual was. This person also directed the 2018 Slenderman movie, as well as 2007's Stomp the Yard, and the sequel to I Know What You Did Last Summer, which was called I'll Always Know What You Did Last Summer, from 2006.
And he just directed this episode of Fargo, which is brilliant.
Insane. He's also directed like some other television. He did some episodes of The Americans, and he did a couple of episodes of, I think like 2 other shows that are really big right now. But he was born and raised in France, so he's this black French filmmaker that directed Slenderman in 2018, but also directed like this incredible episode of prestige television. So this is such a strange Google search, but I mean, my hat is off to you, Sylvain White, because this was one of the best episodes in terms of direction of television that I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, wow, that's actually really funny. I really thought it was going to be just like a separate thing, like, oh, this person directed this indie film that we both really liked like 10 years ago. All right, let's just jump into the recap now that we got that out of the way. We both really love this episode, and definitely we're in an agreement. It's the best episode of this season so far. It is interesting to say that without all the buildup in the last 7 episodes, I don't think this would have had a big impact as much as it did this week. So very exciting. I think this is corny, a way to start it off, but they do talk about Election Day coming up. And if anyone's outside of the U.S., I highly doubt it. But if you guys didn't know, the United States just had a huge election where Joe Biden became the 46th president of the United States. So it's just interesting that Fargo, obviously they did it on purpose. This episode started off with them talking about Election Day, which ties into Desi and her father, and that whole Josto subplot that like isn't a thing at all really this season. Even though it was started in like one of the first episodes this season. I think that's what this season really does. Like, I don't know if it's good or bad, but they really set things up early on and they don't pay it off for a while. Like, I don't know if that's good or not, but that's what they're doing. It happens with Orietta and Ethel's like whole story. Like, it's just very slow, and you're like, this is clearly gonna play a part, and it's gonna happen exactly like this. And then it does. So like with Desi, it's going to be like Orietta stuff probably. And her father probably won't like that. Especially because these opening scenes are tied with them talking about just all of the politics and stuff. Also, Josto has a weird comedy thing where like he like mimes like dick sucking. And this is like the second time. It's like kind of a reoccurring gag with them, I guess, because the first thing in the trailer and in one of the first episodes is like, I'm gonna pump some babies into your daughter. And it's like so not Josto at all, really. And it's just Jason Schwartzman probably having fun on the day and being like, you know what'd be weird? If I just like always talk sexual stuff with this woman's father that I'm gonna marry. Anyways, then it's intercut with Orietta and him having very kinky sex, which we saw earlier this season. She smothers him with a pillow that says, "Bless this mess," which is, folks, it's Devil Watch. we're it's
Devil Watch o'clock. Here
we
it
got
is.
So much Devil Watch in these opening scenes. It's great. Orietta is the credits again. Clearly, she is definitely the main character this season, which is odd to think because she's not in the season a lot. And we just got a great comment about how all these characters are kind of like amalgamations and like kind of dispersed characterizations of like Frances McDormand's character, which is rather interesting. But I definitely think they're all going to have different ends. Then Orietta and Josto kind of just like finish their sexapade, and then they just start talking. And the first question he asks is like, "Do you like being a nurse?" And then she's like, "I like," just an odd thing to ask once you've known someone for so long. And then Orietta keeps saying her mom's like a saint, and then like, and then Josto's like, what does that mean? And then he brings up like exorcisms and stuff, and I'm like, are you kidding me? Like this is what this is all about. This is Devil Watch. This is what we've been waiting for the last 5 weeks. And then Dan's seeing my face turn like bright red right now. I'm so excited.
This is incredible. This is Devil Watch, baby.
Then
Here
they
we
talked
are.
about this special juice that like Orietta's mom keeps drinking. Like, what does that mean? and then Orietta calls. This scene is literally so good. It really encapsulates how excited I am about this episode. And then Orietta calls the hospital and says like, "Oh no, I'm Dr. Harvard's sister. Dr. Harvard's still alive," which is incredible.
We did it, folks.
They hurt.
Dr. Harvard is
They
alive.
heard our prayers, and Dr. Harvard is alive. And then fucking Josto comes back, and then he says, "The devil is an Irishman." And it seems that one of like the Irish head of that mafia that we saw for so long with a scar on his head, and he's one of Rabbi Milligan's many fathers. And yeah, that was just interesting. Then it got me thinking, like, is Josto like also like with some devil stuff? Because there's a lot of devil imagery with like Orietta and stuff, like religious imagery and all this stuff, but like also Josto is right there. I'm sticking to Orietta, obviously, but it would be interesting because this is the second time in Josto's life that he's been around the devil, essentially. And then Josto professes his love to Orietta, and he's in like a very Fargo way. He's like, "I love you, I think." And then also just my last point on this scene, I know I've been talking a lot, Dan, but Josto sounds weirdly 1950s in this scene. Like he's never characterized this way. And then all of a sudden he's talking about like dames and like all this 1950s lingo, and I just thought that was weird. But besides that, it's a very impressive scene to open a very impressive episode. And something this episode does very well is that it allows the characters to build scenes. Heavy Devil Watch and heavy Harvard stuff.
I mean, what is this scene? It's like at times it's like a weird Neil Simon play. Like at the end when they're just bickering when he says, "I love you, I think I do," and then she throws the shirt at him, and then she's like, "Get out of my house! I hope you're gone by the time." And he's like, "Oh, dames." Yeah, it's like very weird in 1950s, and he keeps saying "slick." He says it at least twice in the scene. I mean, yeah, I echo everything that you just said. I mean, what a wild, and again, it's keeping with the trend of in weeks past, they keep putting the weirdest scene in the very beginning, and this is definitely the weirdest scene of the episode, and we get some weird stuff in this episode. But in terms of learning a little bit about Orietta, it's nice to know stuff about her mom and that she was very sick when she was not her mom, but Orietta was very sick when she was a kid, and she was always in and out of the hospitals, and that's why she got special care, is because her mom was so saintly to the doctors. And I mean, that's all good and stuff. But yeah, the whole time I was distracted just thinking about Devil Watch. I was like, oh my God, there is so much Devil Watch going on right now. There's so much. Everything about this scene was really fun. I think you hit it perfectly. This scene was made for us and only us. Also, I want to give a shout out to Schwartzman. He does have, he made me laugh pretty hard in the scene a couple of times. And I think he was pretty good this whole episode. But when Orietta says that her mom was giving her special juice, he goes, speaking of special juice, and then he goes and takes a piss in the bathroom. I mean, tonally, it's like, again, the one problem with the season is like tonally, there is huge differences between this scene and shootout scenes that occur later in this episode. And there's zombie man action going on and like a bunch of wild stuff. But so tonally, there's a lot of up and down going on. But I don't care. It was so much fun. Again, I mean, we have to harp on this a couple times. Harvard is alive. He made a full recovery.
Hell yeah. He's going to be back with vengeance, baby.
Not only was he in a coma, because we said he was probably dead, but he was in a coma, and then he survived and got out of the coma. I mean, this is why Harvard is our favorite character. And
we'll talk about this later, obviously, but he also got transferred out of the hospital. Harvard is making it out this season, I think. I've changed my tune on it. I think he's an X Factor character and he's playing an important part at the end of this season.
Oh, what a good opening scene. I mean, so good.
And also, we can't stress this enough. Besides the Harvard stuff, this scene was tailor-made for us. I don't know if anyone else is on Devil Watch in the Fargo podcasts. I try not to listen to them, so like I don't think of like other interpretations. Just trying to think of my own. Same, but yeah. It will be exciting after this when I start listening to other podcasts, because I'm so curious what people think. Because we'll just talk about this real fast. Like this has been a long time coming for us to talk about Fargo, and it is. I think this is the perfect season to talk about it, because I think it is the most challenging season in a lot of ways, because it's just the most different.
Yeah, definitely please in the comments, let us know if you're as excited about Harvard and Devil Watch and Zombie Man as we are, because it's very possible, to your point, since neither of us listen to Fargo podcasts or really read a lot of reviews on this season of Fargo, it's very possible but that we are the only ones that are queuing into these things. I mean, they're obviously in the show and they play big parts, but I wonder if the viewers of this podcast, I mean, please comment below if you think we're totally insane or if you're catching on to all this also.
Yeah, and moving forward, they have kind of a repeat scene of Josto in his car smoking. He gets into that restaurant where everyone betrays each other. There's a big crowd, and I'm like, oh, Gaetano's back and Josto's fucked. And immediately, the Red Seas part, and it's Gaetano, and he's pissed, and the music this episode is wonderful, and he is super fucking hyped, and he just beats the shit out of Josto, and I was like, okay, Josto's dead, like Josto's about to die, and it's gonna be kind of sad. And then it cuts to black after he gets punched, and then Gaetano just loves him now. Like all of the stuff. This is the one thing we didn't predict, I would say, in this episode. Gaetano is such an asshole and like so like weirdly evil that he loves that Josto is just like intelligent, but like Josto's not even doing like intelligent things. Like he describes Josto as a snake and him as a lion, and like it doesn't completely track for me because I feel like Josto's not that smart. Like he literally just wanted his brother out of the way, and instead of being a man and doing it himself, he like creates this whole like fake narrative that again I don't think he meant for it to happen, but he has Gaetano fully on his side now. And then like like Josto's like, am I dreaming right now? And he's like, no, you're like the bull. Or no, he's like, I'm like the bull, and like I'm like strong, and like you're like the strategist, because I guess he couldn't find another like animal to compare him to. So I just thought that was kind of weird. But yeah, like I was saying, it's kind of, I think it's kind of weak, but it kind of fits with Gaetano because he is kind of an idiot. he pledges his allegiance to Josto, which is very... I think that really is a huge moment in this season, and there's a lot of huge moments, and I feel like this one might get lost. But the whole season has been them fighting over power, and Gaetano has fully given himself to Josto, which I thought was pretty powerful. And at the end, Ebel looks kind of upset. And we'll talk about a theory I have with Ebel.
First, I have one small amendment to your description of the scene. Gaetano didn't just, beat him up. He threw him onto a table and then beat his ass. And I mean, I was totally with you. I thought that Josto was dead, because we had said previously in previous episodes of this podcast that it could be possible that randomly in episode 7, 8, or 9, Josto just gets killed by Gaetano. So that was always up in the air. But then to have it actually almost happen, I was pretty convinced, because sometimes you can tell when they linger on a particular shot, like, oh, this means something terrible is going to happen. It happens later in this episode as well, and we'll get there when we get there. But there's a moment where Justo's on the ground, and then Gaetano drags him by his feet, and they stay on that shot of Schwartzman, like, just in pain on the ground for a good 5 full seconds before he then gets dragged backwards. And I'm thinking, oh, this is super Fargo, because we just go from this insane, weird, odd couple scene where he is professing his love to this devil, and then he goes and finds out that his brother is back and then gets killed, and then he's out for the season. But I'm glad that didn't happen, because we had been predicting that it was either going to be Gaetano or it was going to be Josto. One of them was going to kill the other one, or one of them was going to have to, at some point, take control. What I wrote in my notes was that this was the first curveball of the season. So far, we've been completely right on almost everything. We've been just slightly off on a few things, but this is the first time that we got duped. We got thrown a curveball, and I don't want to say we swung and missed, but we kind of did, and I love that. I'm so happy about that. And there's a bunch of curveballs in this episode. It was the first time that I felt like, oh, okay, this has all been set up, and we're just getting the rug ready to be pulled out now. So I love this scene. Gaetano's definitely an idiot, but he's smart to know that Loy wanted him to do this. Like, he wanted him to kill Josto, and that was the whole point. I'm glad that he comes to his senses and decides, okay, let's partner up, because it provides more and interesting possibilities for the story going forward than what seemed to be one of 2 possibilities.
Yeah, exactly. Great point there. Anything else on that scene?
I mean, he threw him onto a table. He flipped him onto a table.
We can't stress this.
This is a wild episode.
All right, so then the next scene, it's a short scene. Loy is in this episode very little, but when he is, it is incredibly interesting. So the cannons come back, and they immediately know that they figured it out. So my theory, I'll just say it real fast, it's either the cannons have spies within the Fadas, or Ebel is talking with them. Because, without saying anything, it cuts from Ebel to the cannons, going back and telling Loy this news, which makes me think that might be a possibility. Loy being like, we have a problem, so the solution is to call Fargo.
As you mentioned at the end of the scene when Loy drops the Fargo line, it's exciting because, again, it offers possibilities for the story, and we've been predicting this for a while now, that there were going to be other elements that come into play. We were talking about New York, we were talking about Fargo, and so when Loy says we're going to get Fargo involved, one of the many moments in this episode where my jaw drops and then I start smiling from ear to ear. I was grinning the entire time that I was watching this episode, and by the time that this episode was over, I realized that my heart was racing, and I was breathing heavy, and I was smiling like a goober. It's just a really good episode, and it's because there's a million of these little moments.
All right, let's continue. There's a pretty, I don't know. I thought this scene was fine. This episode's just kind of insane. So this scene would have been solid character development in earlier episodes, but this scene's fine now. Debril and Buell have a scene. Buell Cannon, Loy's wife. Thurman has been missing
Tragic.
For the last couple episodes, so has been a bummer. He is a whiskey drinker, though. That was kind of like a nice little thing. And then, Beale's talking about just like how you don't think you can get lower and you just get lower. And then basically the whole scene just leads up to them being like, so could you hold my son Satchel's funeral? And it's just like, I would be honored to do that. It's like very like, it's kind of like an epic ending. Like Debrill's just like, oh, of course. Like, I forget the line exactly, but she's like, yes, I will certainly do that for you. Like out of love, I guess. I don't know. We've been getting a lot of Buell lately, and she had a great scene with Calamita last week, so always good to see her.
Yeah, I wish there was more of her, and I wish there were more scenes like this throughout the season. I think, unfairly, this is sort of what I expected the season to be. I was expecting it to be more about just African-American people living in 1950s Kansas City, and so I was expecting more scenes like this, like two African-American wives coming from similar circumstances and then rising in different ways, coming together at a dinner table to talk about weird Fargo stuff. But you're right. In this episode, compared to everything else that happens, it kind of is the lesser interesting thing. But in a different version of this season, it would have been nice to have this for 11 episodes as opposed to all the crazy stuff that we're also getting. But there were a few lines that jumped out at me. One thing that I am disappointed with is that we still don't get much Ethel Rita in this episode, and just generally in the season. We still don't really know who she is. We know she's an exceptional student. She's a genius. She's very smart. She's a genius, and she's very smart, and that's kind of it. There's a line in this scene where Debrill says that her daughter, and she's talking about Ethel Rita, has dreams that take my breath away. And that actually kind of got me choked up. I thought that was a really sweet line. And it shows, again, that real love that the family has for each other. And it just reminds me of how important it is, this family, but also for us as viewers and for the world, to have Ethel Rita's voice going forward. And she mentions that, like, she has these dreams that take her breath away, and it wouldn't be fair if her life is ruined because of this debt that they have to the Cannons. It just got me real sad thinking about possibilities for how the season could end. I've said early on that I think it's going to end positively for Ethel Rita, but made me feel a little bit more gloomy.
And I think we've talked about it on this podcast before, how Ethel Rita might just get caught in the middle of everything and like die and like be one of the only people that die, which a lot of people die this episode, so a little untrue. But yeah, definitely. And speaking of Ethel Rita, the next scene is one of our only scenes with Ethel Rita. She is looking at Orietta's ring to remind you of all of the Orietta stuff. And then, this is so interesting. I really offhandedly said, like, if it was a longer season, Lemuel and Ethel Rita might have a thing just because they're around the same age. And it kind of looks like that's where they're going with it. Lemuel is in there, and him and Ethel Rita are just talking. There's a funny "you like jazz" line, which is classic B-movie meme. And they just start talking about like jazz, and it's really funny because she's like, oh, I like Louis Armstrong. And then he's like, oh, everyone always talks about Louis, but what about Dizzy? And it's like, okay, so everyone also only talks about Dizzy. Like, come on, Lemuel, you're not like hot shit or anything. And then they said a jazz musician I didn't know. So then I was like, okay, fine. Lemuel, you get a pass there. And then, yeah, it was just interesting because they talked about how, like, Ethel Rita likes structure. I was just interested to, like, why was Lemuel there is kind of my question. Like, I know he was moving boxes last episode, but, like, is, like, the timeline's kind of weird here because it's, like, he's alone. And at the end, he, like, goes down to see his mother. And then Debrill has an interesting line about Lemuel near the end of this scene where she says to Ethel Rita, he's your captor, not your friend. You can't afford to make mistakes, which was interesting. And it also just shows that, like, while Thurman was, like, very much like, oh, like, I didn't know what I was doing, like, it seems like Debrill, especially with, like, her sisters, Elmore, being, like, a convict and stuff, it seems like she's a little more prepared for all this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the he is your captor part is really interesting, because that is a whole that's a whole power dynamic situation that's going on that she's aware of, enough so to say. And then also the line that you can't afford to make mistakes is I mean, that's kind of very telling of, again, the African American experience. And again, this is a really good season of Fargo. What's happening in this sequence, these two scenes. We also had a scene just before this where a large man flips another smaller man into a table, beats him up, and then pledges his allegiance to him, only following the scene where that smaller man has kinky sex with the incarnation of the devil. So with all that together, this is kind of small potatoes. But in another version of this season, this is really good stuff. And it still is really good stuff. But it's just,
we can't stress this enough. Two brothers got in a fight, and one of them launched another one into a table, then dragged him across the floor and punched him in the face, and then pledged allegiance to him.
That's right. And this is after this brother just had kinky sex with the devil. So this scene is really understated, and that's why it's good as a scene, but it's not quite good in the context of the overall season.
Like, let's say if Lemuel was in this scene with Ethel, and he took her and threw her through a table, and then afterwards, Ethelrita pledged allegiance to Lemuel, then maybe we'd be talking. Anyways, our next scene leads us to Orietta. And I think this is a theme we haven't really talked about too much in this episode, but this scene really shows that every character is like nearing the edge of what they've been doing. Like with Josto, with Orietta, and with Ethel, they've all been like cruising lately, but now they're getting to the end of that road, and a lot's going to happen. So Orietta talks to another nurse, and the nurse basically just is an exposition nurse, so she just says everything that Orietta needs to know. You don't see too much of that in Fargo, but it is really interesting when you do. But the nurse is basically just like, oh, he's out of state, he's recovering, and like, damn, when he like wakes up, like apparently like they think it's poison and like someone poisoned him, and like when he wakes up he'll probably know who poisoned him. And like basically just saying all this stuff to make like Orietta like freak out.
This is the most M. Night Shyamalan exposition dump. I recently rewatched The Village I watch like 30 horror movies, one every day in October, or at least I try to every year. And one movie that I watched was M. Night Shyamalan's The Village. And that movie is famous for a huge exposition dump that M. Night Shyamalan, the director, actually gives as an actor late in the movie. And that's what this scene felt like. It was so wild how hardcore that exposition was. You hit it exactly. She literally just says like, oh yes, he's making a full recovery and he's moved out of this place because we heard it was poison, and whoever it is going to be in trouble real soon. When you have so much extremely interesting stuff to get to, I don't really care that much that there's this one exposition dump, but it is a remarkable exposition dump.
Because to go on from the exposition dump, there is, and we talk about this all the time, Fargo drums are the most hype thing ever, and I'm so glad that Orietta has like some like drum score going on here, because the drums go off and she leaves the hospital immediately and then goes home and just starts furiously packing. She has her weird twitches that I feel like we haven't seen in a while. Like she's been very comfortable lately, but she's back to her twitchish self. She like basically like moves like everything, and it looks like at first I thought she was going directly to find Harvard and murder him. Because I thought that would be so funny if she just like found the place and murdered him. But it looks like she's going out of town. She goes into her closet and grabs like everything, all like the memorabilia and stuff. Perhaps she's also throwing it away, maybe, to just get it away. Anyways, I definitely think she's packing and getting out of there. And then we've been calling this for like 3 weeks now. She stumbles upon Ethelrita's diary. She puts the notes together And it's honestly like pretty nice way to put this. Ethel has a voiceover where she's reading the letter, and it's like it all just comes together in Orietta's mind, and that's pretty nice. And then Ethel walks outside her house, and Orietta watches her. So we're back to that horror movie thing we've been talking about all season. And it's actually been a while since I feel like Orietta and Ethel have really had interaction. So it will be interesting to see that Orietta now knows everything about Ethel. And Ethel seems to not know that she left her journal in Orietta's house. So
Yeah, it's weird that we are 8 episodes in and we've just gotten back to the beginning again with these two characters. And that does bring up a good question. I mean, the timeline of this season is pretty tough for me to track. I'm going to have to go back and rewatch this season to kind of really figure out, is it days, weeks in between certain things? But it seems like it's been a long enough period of time since she left her notebook for her to then realize that she left her notebook somewhere. And that was also something that I was expecting in previous episodes. I kept thinking, okay, the next logical scene is going to be Ethel Rita at home, realizing, because she has to do some homework for school, because she's in school, in case anyone forgot.
I did.
I think we all did. But I thought she was going to be like doing some homework and then looking for her notebook, realizing she didn't have her notebook, then realizing she left it over at Orietta's, and then having to stage some sort of, break-in or at least think about some sort of break-in. But that never happened. And I thought that they could have played with that in this episode, having those two things cross-cutting would have been interesting. But it appears that she does not have any love for that notebook. So, but yeah, it was... like you said earlier in this episode, they set up things weeks in advance and then don't pay them off and then finally pay them off in this episode. And this is one of those things. We finally get the notebook reveal. So I'm glad that we're moving forward with it, because I feel like we've just sort of been waiting with Orietta to get here, and now she's here. So
I certainly think there's nothing worse than introducing something, everyone can see where it's going, and then you just wait until next episode and you go, remember this thing. Like, I feel like that's what they were doing with the notebook. And it's like, no, we know. Like, just put that scene later. So, like, that's just the payoff. Like, I don't know. It's felt like filler for the last 3 episodes with Orietta and Ethel Rita. At least that storyline. So, I just wish...
And they also did it with Orietta and Harvard, too.
Yeah.
Like, with the macaroon. Like, they set that up, and then there's a small reminder in a following episode, and then eventually... she gives him the macaroon.
Oh my God, does he eat that macaroon?
Oh my God, he sure does. I don't think enough people are talking about this in the comment section, how good that macaroon scene was.
We can't stress this enough. He eats it like in a way that makes you feel like if you had a brother and you threw him through a table and then beat him up and then pledged your allegiance to him. All right, so moving forward, we go to the Cannon's house. This is a weird line. I'm just gonna say, Lloyd comes out of his car, right, and he goes, "I'm gonna change my clothes," and then he mutters something else that I couldn't understand and didn't want to rewind it. And then I'm like, what? Like, why are you setting this scene up like this? This is kind of weird. And then basically Debbie comes up, talks to Opal. There's a nice little exchange there. Debbie says something weird about like how like gunshots sound like Chinese New Year's. Weird Debbie stuff. And then there's a really great scene with Loy and Debbie. And Debbie says, I really like Debbie. I wish I knew him more, but I really like him because he's odd, and he has this weird line where he says, when Loy asks him if he wants a drink, he says, "No, I'm good. My mom always said that alcohol's your friend with a knife," which doesn't track fully with me, because like if my friend had a knife, I would feel secure and safe.
Oh, interesting.
Right?
Says a lot about your friend group.
Yeah, I feel like my friends are nice, and like if they had a knife, I'd just be like, cool. I can like open a cardboard box if I got one and you were there. I wouldn't be like, uh-oh, he's going to stab me in the back. But I guess
And then flip you through a table.
And then put me through a table. But yeah, and then it's basically all about Defi wants to know where Zelmar and Swanee are, and Loy doesn't know if he wants to give him up. Loy directly quotes Mike Milligan from season 2, and it's a scene we've talked about earlier this season. I think it was episode 1 or 2 of this podcast where we were saying this interaction felt very much like that. And I was thinking this throughout this whole thing, and then as soon as Loy said, pretty unfriendly, actually, I'm like, holy shit, they're gonna do it. That whole Defi's not Minnesotan, but it's that whole like Midwest charm that a lot of these characters have that are hidden behind horrible racism. And Loy actually does give Zelmar and Swanee up. He's not the first. The entire Smutney family just gave them up on separate occasions to the Cannons and to Defi. So I guess Loy giving Zelmar and Swanee up to Defi again in a different way is one, funny and cyclical, and two, just shows that Zelmar and Swanee's time and or friendships are fleeting in this world.
Yeah, I mean, did we confirm this in the very first episode of this podcast that Satchel was Mike Milligan? I feel like we did, and we've been confirming it every single week, and this is just more evidence. They're directly quoting Mike Milligan from season 2, and this is what would be Mike Milligan's father. And there's a bunch of other little tendencies that you could pick up on between the two characters. God, but it reminded me of how good season 2 was. And so I went back and I rewatched that scene, and man, do I love Mike Milligan, and do I love that performance by Bokeem Woodbine. It's the way you're unfriendly. It's amazing. That's really great Fargo, because there's the Midwestern sort of vibe is sort of taken for granted, and the show deconstructs that, and the movie deconstructed that in such interesting ways. So that was awesome, just to have more confirmation about Mike Milligan. But then also what I've actually really loved about this scene, we've joked about the monologuing that characters do, but one thing I have really loved is all of the monologues about crime. And I really like Defi's stuff in this scene when he's talking about the mind of the criminal and how it should be really easy for Loy to give up Zelmar and Swanee, because, I mean, he calls them out. He's like, would a family man sell his son for more power? Like, no, give up Zelmar and Swanee. These are criminals. Like, just do it. And then he does. I totally agree. I wish we knew more about Defi, but when he is on screen, he's awesome. And something that just made me do some thinking in this scene was his eyes were in shadow, covered by his hat for most of the scene, which I thought was an interesting choice. That was the first time that I became sort of aware of how interestingly directed this episode was. Defi's eyes covered by his hat, which is an obvious choice because they could have just lowered the light 3 inches and then you'd see more of his eyes for most of the scene. So they want you to not see his eyes in that scene. He's not the good cop necessarily. He's not a bad cop either, but he is sort of in this in-between space. And then as the scene goes along, the camera lowers and then his eyes are slowly more and more revealed. And he's actually I guess he's level with the camera, but it seems like he's slightly above the camera. Just sort of that power play is happening with the camera and the way that the camera is shifting its position. And then at the end of the scene, again, this episode is so well directed. The tension is really well played. The camera pulls back on Loy or when the guns are drawn. And for a moment, you really think somebody's going to die. You think maybe Opal's going to die over in the corner. You know Loy's not going to die yet, but he even sells it in that moment like he's going to die. And then they release the tension, and then Defi's on his way. But that scene was so well directed, and in lesser hands, that scene would be so uninteresting, because we've had scenes like this throughout the season that have been uninteresting. A lot of Loy's scenes have been uninteresting, but the direction in the scene was so good, so magnificent, that it elevated it beyond what we thought that it could be.
Yeah, definitely. Those are great points, and I totally agree with all of them. All right, moving right along. Defi at the station, and we see our boy Otis coming in hot, pretty late into this episode. And it was in this scene where I wrote in my notes, Defi will die this episode. Also, he has a weird line where he's like, I haven't been fooled by man or beast since Hitler. Like, essentially, that was it. Like, and it was like, wait, was...
Right, was he duped by
Wait,
Hitler? Did he fall for the final solution? What was that about?
Yeah, was he like a Nazi, like in America? Just a fun, weird Defi line. And then it was really interesting, Otis scene also, like Otis wants in, again, as a cop. He talks about how he's just so, like, overcome by this, like, this OCD and these twitches he has, that, like, he feels like, he felt like the only way to, like, get that out again, like, get that out of his, like, life is through power. And that's why he became a cop. But then he realized being a cop is like way more stressful than he believed, because he's getting pulled by all directions. And it really seems like this is like a moment for him to be like, I'm going to be a cop and I'm going to try my best to be good. He tells Defi he's been talking to Loy and stuff, and how like Loy wants to make sure Zelmar and Swanee are dead so they don't come back and bite him in the ass. Defi has a really interesting line near the end of this scene where he goes, want to live like a man, you gotta die like a man, or like something to that extent. And that was pretty interesting. And he also says, Defi also says his like biggest fear is like dying with like one boot or something, basically like without like finishing like what he started and stuff like that. So
yeah, it was fun because I think this scene is really helped by all the arduous setup that we've been getting throughout the season. We've gotten so much more of Otis in these last couple of episodes, and we talked about this last week, but we really love Otis now, like where he's going in the story and also him as a character. And so, yeah, in this moment, you really believe, oh, this is where he's going to go. He's been getting pulled apart from both ends, and then he sees a way out, and that way out is going to be Defi, and that is going to provide more story potential for Defi as well. They're going to team up. Now Gaetano and Justo are teamed up, and so everyone's sort of forming these different teams. And so you really believe that Otis is turning the corner for good.
Yeah, and speaking of, let's head into the train station. Weird Zelmar and Swanee line. I just want to say I really do hate this line. It just reminded me of a Walking Dead line that I absolutely hated, and it's not as bad as the Walking Dead line and the subsequent scene that happens, but it has the same effect. Zelmar and Swanee are in this train station. Swanee wants sweets, and Zelmar says, that sweet tooth's gonna kill you one day. And it's like, all right, this is like clear setup that Swanee's gonna die this scene. Anyways, continuing throughout this scene, Swanee gets candy in a very Swanee/Zelmar type thing. She asks for a couple of candies and then like puts all of them in her pocket, which I thought was fun. The guy also calls her a man. Then the boys come up. The police boys come in. They arrive. Defi and Otis are in their car, and this is so funny to me. Defi is like Otis is like freaking out because he's about to like go into like a place guns a-blazing, which he hasn't in forever. And then Defi is in a last ditch effort to calm him. Instead of letting him do his OCD stuff, he's like, I got a poem for you. And I'm like, oh God, here we go. It's gonna be like the Jabberwock poem that Mike Milligan tells in season 2. It's gonna be like some hugely like dramatic poem, and then it's just like a child's poem, and it's so fucking good.
Defi also says cheer up, Palomino, which I'm gonna start using just in my daily phrasing. So just get ready for that, because I love that. Cheer up, Palomino.
Yeah.
Defi's great. Defi's so much fun. And I love that the pelican bit is great. And at the end, he's like, Geronimo. And then he gets out of the car. and then Otis stays in there. But yeah, before that with Zelmar and Swanee, I love these two. I love these two so much. And the sweet tooth line was, it almost sours some without that. That was an unintentional pun. It almost sours some of the surprise that comes later, but not quite. I do love just some of those last moments where they're just kind of sitting there having fun. And yeah, I just love these two. And once the boys come in,
Remember those cops that we talked about in episode 2 or 3? Where it's like, where did they all go? Well, here they are, and they're coming in, guns a-blazing. Right before they basically say, bring them in alive, but if they engage, all bets are off. Shit starts hitting the fan. Swanee sees Zombie Man. We'll talk more about Zombie Man at the end of the scene, I think. But we were talking about how last week that like it could definitely be like, death itself, or he could be like representative of like race and like just society in general in the 1950s. And I still think that works with Swanee because she is Native American. And there is no hesitation with Zelmar and Swanee, and this is why I like them. They want to go out guns a-blazing, and they're super ready to. And they just start shooting. And then it cuts back to Otis, who's just furiously like doing his OCD stuff. He gets out of the car. He sees all these dead bodies of civilians and police alike. In an odd little like twist, I want to say, like all of a sudden in like this really green room also. And we've talked about the color green a couple of times on this podcast. Like Otis has them, and it seems fake. It seems like it's not what it seems, but it is. I guess he's just like they've run out of bullets. It was just like an odd little scene. I thought that is not where the twist comes in this episode. And then Otis shoots Deffy almost immediately, and then following that, he immediately shoots Swanee in the fucking face. She goes down. She's dead, super dead. And I can't stress this enough. Shot in the face, like immediately, crazy. Rest in peace, Swanee. And then Zelmar sees Zombie Man. And then Otis seems like he's about to shoot Zelmar as well. And then she runs away and gets away. Something that I saw really haunting, and something we joked about last week too. Deffy was Otis's Zombie Man. And when Otis is on the floor, he looks up at Deffy's dead body, and it's like his eyes are open and looking directly at Otis, like he's haunting him, which is pretty powerful. But yeah, overall, insane scene. We lost 2 great characters in this scene, unfortunately, with Swanee and Deffy. Otis kills both of them, and it's interesting to see if Otis isn't taking sides at this point, it seems. It seems like he's just trying to let his mind rest and to have power in a situation.
Yeah, very well said. I'm going to split this up into 2 parts, the shootout portion and then the portion where the twist happens. In the shootout portion,
perfect.
It's like such a Western. It's so much fun, down to the they never caught the train thing. Like it's so cool. Zelmar and Swanee have been that all season. Like that's who they are. They're outlaws. That's who they are. And so I think that they deserve that. Well, obviously Zelmar gets out, but Swanee, I suppose, deserved a Western ending, and she got a Western ending. Also, since they do a great job of setups and payoffs with everything throughout the season, I was kind of expecting when she died and fell backwards, all the sweets were going to fall out of her pockets, and it was going to be really on the nose, but thank God that did not happen. I love the moment. Again, this episode is so well directed. I can't get over Sylvain White's direction in this episode. I'm just like starstruck all of a sudden. Because when Deffy gets into the building and he's looking around, and then Zelmar and Swanee, Swanee sees Zombie Man, and then Zelmar starts to notice weird things are happening. They slow everything down. Everything's in slow motion. Deffy's looking, and then Zelmar and Deffy make eye contact, and you know it's on. And then Zelmar and Swanee get one last kiss, which was really sweet. They go down, guns a-blazing. That was amazing. I loved everything about that. Then Otis jumps in, like you mentioned, sees all the dead bodies. I was kind of shocked at how many civilian dead bodies there were. That kind of did complicate things a little bit for me. I was like, okay, this is a little tough now. But lots of dead bodies. He finds Deffy, Zelmar, and Swanee at the end of a hallway. And again, this is like really good lighting and really good. It was like, it's kind of movie-esque because it's not supernatural, but that hallway scene, like the lights are flickering and you don't get a close-up of Deffy when he has them in when he's caught them. So you know something is just off. Like you hear his line on a push-in as Otis is walking towards them. So you're just seeing his back as he says, "I've got them. They ran out of bullets." And it's over. Deffy's out. And then Swanee's out. And so two things happen here. One, I love that Otis, like you said, is trying to take control and takes things into his own hands because he's been a puppet for everyone else this whole season. So him now being able to exert control is interesting narratively. But then also, again, they split up the duo. They split up the outlaw team, which is something that they've done every season, and I'm so bummed about it. I loved Zelmar and Swanee, and I'm so sad that Swanee had to go. But I guess it makes sense because Zelmar has more connections to the Smutny family and whatnot. This was so good. All of this was so good. And then it ends also with a crossfade from Otis to Loy smoking, which was an interesting choice as well.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about Zombie Man before we go into the last Vada scene. This was the first time we saw him in public. He's making his big break at the train station. Oh, God, I can't wait to put that image in this podcast. He's making his big break. And it is really weird to see him like in full lighting. He was shy last week. This week, hell, he'll go into a train station and be chill about it. And it definitely seems like he's a merchant of death, so to speak. Like, and just real fast, we do know that he is credited as Mr. Snowman, but I just love the name Zombie Man. So I will continue. I think we'll continue to use that just as a joke.
Yeah, he's getting a ton of play out here. Yeah, we mentioned that. I mean, obviously, we thought early on it was just the Zombie Man was the curse on the Smutny family, but now it is clearly extending outward. And we mentioned last week that was possible, that if we started to see in this episode other characters noticing Zombie Man, then it could come to a conclusion where Zombie Man shows up as either like an ex machina, out of nowhere to save the day or ruin the day for somebody, or it could end in a weird Twin Peaks season 3 kind of way. It's unclear how important it will be at this point, but it seems like it's got to be really important, like you said. I don't know. I don't know what this means going forward.
Last scene. It looks like there's a slight time jump, maybe a day or two. Gaetano is more fixed up. And it's just really, it's kind of nice to see Gaetano and Josto finally getting together. I feel like they definitely earned like the brotherly connection for them. And this payoff has been really nice. They mention where Calamita is, because like I was thinking that the whole episode. I'm like, oh, where is our suave Italian guy? Calamita is searching for Milligan, and when they started saying that, there's also a scene with Gaetano and Josto and their mother, which is also kind of like a Sweets line. She's like, "You're gonna die of a cold out there," and then it kind of cuts to like people sneaking up through the woods, and I'm like, okay, this should be like the end of the episode soon. And then they shoot this I want to say just like this drive-by shooting. Very interestingly, it's kind of like those montages we've been talking about earlier. It's very hectic. Mort Kellerman comes in, guns a-blazing. And then Gaetano, like it seems like the end of the line for at least Gaetano or Josto, which I would be very upset about, because I'd be like, damn, like they just got along. And then Gaetano just goes full beast mode, pulls out 2 guns and just starts shooting. He probably gets a couple guys and then they retreat, but not before killing, it looks like, their mother and possibly what's her face, yeah, whatever that guy is, and his wife. what's her face? She's gonna go after Rabbi Milligan and kill him, similar to the Quentin Tarantino film Kill Bill, but it's instead called Kill Mill. But it looks like she might be dead. Anyways, kind of a crazy scene. We've been talking about a war all this season, and it definitely seems like fires. It definitely seems like some shots have been fired now. And Gaetano and Justo look very sad at the end of this episode. So it will be interesting to see where they go, probably in 2 weeks.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this scene, the way that they start the scene by showing us that brotherly love is really sweet. And the mother, who has had a couple of moments earlier in the season, she gets some shine for a second. Yeah, it was sweet. It was too sweet, though. You know something's coming out of the woods. Something like everything's going too well. At first, though, I kind of did think things were going to turn. I thought it was just going to be a delayed Gaetano kills Justo scene, because when he asks where Calamita is, Justo is like, "Oh, I sent him to find the kid and Rabbi Milligan." And then Gaetano for a second looks like, "Wait, you told our enemy a lie?" It looked like he was actually about to get pissed, but instead he's like, "Oh, that's hilarious. You're a strategist. You're a genius." I mean, it's cool that Fargo is now involved. And what that means going forward. And the war has definitely begun, and Gaetano and Justo have a new bond, a new allegiance, and they're going to be pissed because Mama just got a bullet in the chest. So things end pretty sad for those characters, which speaks to the title of this episode, which the Nadir, which means basically the lowest point.
They talked about the lowest point in the Debril and Buell scene. So it's nice when it all kind of connects in an episode. Oh yeah, let's talk about the aw heck moment of the week. I have a definite one this week. It's a lot of fun. I feel like we switch off on like fun and like serious ones. So mine will be fun this week. My aw heck moment of the week is certainly Deffy's poem. I just think it subverts the Fargo expectation in such a way that made me laugh so hard. And I couldn't get over how simple of a poem it was. And also, rest in peace, Deffy. Really, really wonderful to have Timothy Olyphant this season. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was in more episodes with Otis, just as like a haunting figure. And also, Kelsey Asbiel did great this season as Swanee. A lot of fun.
My ah heck moment of the week is also related to Deffy, but more specifically to Otis. It's Otis's turn at the end. His big twist, the big reveal when he kills Deffy and he kills Swanee, and then Zelmar gets away. That's pretty quintessential Fargo. It's a selfish act of self-interest. By a character who's caught in between two different worlds, and nothing is more Fargo than that. It's also a curveball, which we haven't gotten a ton of this season, but Fargo is so good at throwing curveballs, and I certainly didn't see it coming, and when I don't see something coming, that's when I know it's Fargo.
So yeah, Dan, predictions. It's going to be a little different this week, so if you want to say it, because the preview was very different and very clear for us, I think.
Yeah, I mean, normally we would talk about what's Otis going to do now that Deffy's out of the way, what's going to happen with Zelmar, where's Zelmar going to go, but we're going to save that for next week's episode, because it looks like or at least our episode for next week, because it looks like next week's episode is going to focus solely on Rabbi Milligan and Satchel and Calamita, and we talked about this in our predictions from last week about how great of a chase that's going to be. So we're just going to mostly talk about that this week, and then after next week's episode, we'll start to talk about the ramifications in our predictions from what happened at the end of this episode.
Yeah, and I don't think I would necessarily characterize this next episode as a bottle episode, but I think that's the only term I can use proper like to describe what I think is going to happen this episode. And we figured this out recently, that there's going to be 11 episodes this season, and it's always interesting to me to see like when either there's less episodes in a season or more episodes in a season, and this season is one episode longer, which typically means that the creative team behind it was like, we need that extra episode. And it looks like they're going full out for episode 9. And it's just going to be the chase the whole time, and it's going to be in full black and white, it looks like, and there's going to be like tornadoes and stuff, and it should be fun because Milligan and Calamita have been some of our favorite characters in this season, and to see them face off against each other is going to be pretty awesome. I definitely think one of them will die. I think I predicted it last week that Calamita is probably going to die because everyone was after Calamita. But after this episode, it seems like everyone's kind of chill with Calamita, besides Rabbi Milligan. So it will be certainly interesting to see if either of them are going to kick the bucket. But my prediction is like one of them will. And I think either way, Satchel's going to get out somehow.
Yeah, I think to just put a slightly different spin on your prediction, because I agree, I would say Calamita is currently dead within the timeline of Fargo. I think the reason it's black and white is because it is going back in time like a day or two. It's going to start off right where we left off with Milligan and Satchel probably, and that was it a couple days ago in the timeline now. So I think when Justo and Gaetano were having that conversation, like, where is Calamita? And he says, oh yeah, I sent him to go find Rabbi Milligan. I think at that point, Calamita will already have been dead, and we'll learn that in this episode. It's going to be a really fun episode, though, and I cannot wait to see what this tornado has in store for us, because there's always like a weird... so far this season, Zombie Man and Devil Watch have been the weird sort of supernatural, unexplainable thing, but even in season 1, you think back to the fish storm. There's always like a weird natural event, and then season 2, it wasn't natural, but the UFOs also, all of that. There's always something strange going on, and having a tornado just show up, it adds an extra element to the chase. Tornado's chasing Calamita, and Calamita's chasing Rabbi Milligan. And I also don't think Calamita is going to make it out, and I definitely think Calamita is dying this episode. So I'm curious if Calamita... Here's a scenario, basically. If Calamita kills Rabbi Milligan, that means Satchel's killing Calamita. And that's going to put Satchel on the path towards becoming Mike Milligan. So I think that's the most logical thing that might happen. Because I don't see a situation necessarily where Rabbi Milligan and Satchel live out their days until Rabbi Milligan is a little bit older and then dies of cancer right before season 2 begins, Yeah, they're starting to they're getting their real power players together for these last few episodes. I think Calamita has always been a fun sort of X Factor character, but he's on the side. He's in the periphery, and he's always been he's been the extended arm of other characters. So I don't see him making it out of this episode because I think they just need to continue to cut down on characters in order to get to the heart of the story, which is Justo, Loy, and Ethel Rita. Those are the 3 characters that have to really start to dig their heels in these last few episodes. And it seems like...
I was going to say, in addition to those 3 characters, there's also the wild card in Orietta roaming around.
Right. Yeah, so she still has to rear her devil horns. And so it seems like we're setting up for all of these side characters, all of these wonderful side characters, with a few exceptions, to die so that we could just get Gaetano and Justo versus Loy and Orietta versus Ethel Rita.
Yeah. And I definitely think this next episode will trim the fat a bit. Probably... might finish Satchel's story also. I could see kind of like no character really knows what happens to Satchel, perhaps. So Satchel kind of just like lays low after this like big fight between Calamita and Rabbi Milligan. So it should be interesting, and I'm really looking forward to next week's episode. Though it will slow the plot that has sped up significantly this episode.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do want to just throw out one silly prediction, as I often do. What are the chances that, okay, so Calamita and Rabbi Milligan and Satchel, they're chasing each other. They're going through this whole thing. The tornado's coming. The whole episode, it's cat and mouse, cat and mouse, cat and mouse, and who's going to win? And then all of a sudden, bang, Rabbi Milligan gets shot. He's out. He says, get out of here, kid. Like, don't give a crap about me. I'm dead, so be gone. And then Satchel runs away, and then Calamita gets hit by a tornado. Who cares? They're both dead. Satchel is alone. What are the chances? Give me a percentage from 0 to 100. What are the chances that he runs into the baby Kitchen brothers?
Yeah, yep, that's exactly what I thought you were going. I will say I give it. All right, since they're twins, I'll give it a 50-50 shot.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
I think it'll be that. And they have like little bolo hats on. Because they can't afford the fedoras yet, so they have bolo hats.
And they got the coats.
But they're like little baby coats.
Exactly.
And you can't tell what color they are because it's black and white.
And they've got like little baby 5 o'clock shadow.
Yeah, it's like, oh, that's going to be a beard one day.
And Satchel's like, what are your names? And then they don't say anything. And then they like gesture to Satchel, what's your name? And then he goes, Milligan. Mike Milligan.
Well, what's really funny is that if we made this crazy ass prediction episode 9 of season 2, then the next episode when we see baby Mr. Numbers and Mr. Wrench, we'd literally freak out because we're like, wow, that was a complete joke, and they actually did it. So there is credence to our theory here that like this very much could happen next episode, that baby Mike Milligan runs into baby Kitchen brothers. But yeah, no, overall a great episode this week. Looking forward to next week, which will most likely be more of a bottle episode. But it's always that fun thing, like I was talking about earlier, where it's like, we added another episode, and that episode is going to be something we've wanted to do for a long time, but isn't episodic enough to put in a full episode without being its episode by itself. So yeah, really looking forward to it. I love when shows just do that because they can.
Yeah, really looking forward to next week. It's going to be a cool bottle episode. As for this episode, shout out to Swanee, shout out to Deffy, and shout out to Sylvain White, who directed this episode, because it was such a well-directed episode. I'm in love with this episode, and I've loved this season, but this episode really just got me jazzed up in a way that none of the other episodes have.